All right. So yesterday was pretty short. Got interrupted. So we'll see how much we can get through today, right? We do what we can, but God is always in control. Joseph is made the governor over Egypt. We'll pick back up there. We started in the middle of that. The king and his officials liked this plan. So the king said to them, "No one could possibly handle this better than Joseph, since the Spirit of God is with him." The king told Joseph, "God is the one who has shown you these things. No one else is as wise as you are or knows as much as you do. I'm putting you in charge of my palace, and everybody will have to obey you. No one will be over you except me. You are now the governor of all Egypt." Then the king took off his royal ring and put it on Joseph's finger. He placed a gold chain around his neck. He also let him ride in the chariot next to his own. And people shouted, "Make way for Joseph." So Joseph was governor of Egypt. The king told Joseph, "Although I'm king, no one in Egypt is to do anything without your permission." He gave Joseph the Egyptian name Zaphenath-Paneah, and he let him marry Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, a priest in the city of Heliopolis. Joseph traveled all over Egypt. Joseph was 30 when the king made him governor, and he went everywhere for the king. For 7 years, there were big harvests of grain. Joseph collected and stored up the extra grain in the cities of Egypt near the fields where it was harvested. In fact, there was so much grain that they stopped keeping record, because it was like counting the grains of sand along the beach. Joseph and his wife had 2 sons before the famine began. Their first son was named Manasseh, which means God has let me forget all my troubles and my family back home. His second son was named Ephraim, which means God has made me a success in the land where I suffered. Egypt's 7 years of plenty came to an end, and 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was not enough food in other countries, but all over Egypt there was plenty. When the famine finally struck Egypt, the people asked the king for food, but he said, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you to do." The famine became bad everywhere in Egypt, so Joseph opened the storehouses and sold the grain to the Egyptians. People from all over the world came to Egypt because the famine was severe in their countries. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt to buy grain. Chapter 42. When Jacob found out there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you just sitting here, staring at one another? I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Now go down and buy some, so we won't starve to death." 10 of Joseph's brothers went to Egypt to buy grain, but Joseph did not send Joseph's younger brother Benjamin with him. He was afraid that something might happen to him. So Jacob's sons joined others from Canaan who were going to Egypt because of the terrible famine. Since Joseph was governor of Egypt and in charge of selling grain, his brothers came to him and bowed with their faces to the ground. They did not recognize Joseph, but right away he knew who they were, though he pretended not to know. Instead, he spoke harshly and asked, "Where do you come from?" "From the land of Canaan," they answered. "We've come here to buy grain." Joseph remembered what he had dreamed about them and said, "You're spies. You've come here to find out where our country is weak." "No, sir," they replied. "We're your servants, and we have only come to buy grain. We're honest men, and we come from the same family. We're not spies." "That isn't so," Joseph insisted. "We've come here to find out where our country is weak." But they explained, "Sir, we come from a family of 12 brothers. The youngest is still with our father in Canaan, and one of our brothers is dead." Joseph replied, "It's just like I said. You're spies, and I'm going to find out who you really are. I swear by the life of the king that you won't leave this place until your youngest brother comes here. Choose one of you to go after your brother, while the rest of you stay here in jail. That will show whether you are telling the truth. But if you're lying, I swear by the life of the king that you are spies." Joseph kept them all under guard for 3 days before saying to them, "Since I respect God, I'll give you a chance to save your lives. If you are honest men, one of you must stay here in jail, and the rest of you can take the grain back to your starving families. But you must bring your youngest brother to me. Then I'll know that you are telling the truth, and you won't be put to death." Joseph's brothers agreed and said to one another, "We're being punished because of Joseph. We saw the trouble he was in, but we refused to help him when he begged us. That's why these terrible things are happening." Reuben spoke up. "Didn't I tell you not to harm the boy? But you wouldn't listen, and now we have to pay the price for killing him." They did not know that Joseph could understand them, since he was speaking through an interpreter. Joseph turned away from them and cried, but soon he turned back and spoke to them again. Then he had Simeon tied up and taken away while they watched. Joseph's brothers returned to Canaan. Joseph gave orders for his brothers' grain sacks to be filled with grain and for their money to be put in their sacks. He also gave orders for them to be given food for their journey home. After this was done, they each loaded the grain on their donkeys and left. When they stopped for the night, one of them opened the sack to get some of the grain for his donkey, and right away he saw his money bag. "Here's my money," he told his brothers, "right here in my sack." They were trembling with fear as they stared at one another and asked themselves, "What has God done to us?" When they returned to the land of Canaan, they told their father Jacob everything that had happened to them. "The governor of Egypt was rude and treated us like spies, but we told him, 'We're honest men, not spies. We come from a family of 12 brothers. The youngest is still with our father in Canaan, and the other is dead.' Then the governor of Egypt told us, 'I'll find out if you really are honest. Leave one of your brothers here with me while you take the grain to your starving families. But bring your youngest brother to me so I can be certain that you are honest men and not spies. After that, I'll let your other brother go free, and you can stay here and trade.' When the brothers started emptying their sacks of grain, they found their money bags in them. They were frightened, and so was their father Jacob, who said, 'You have already taken my sons Joseph and Simeon away from me, and now you want to take away Benjamin. Everything is against me.' Reuben spoke up, 'Father, if I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill both of my sons. Trust me with him, and I will bring him back.' But Jacob said, 'I won't let my son Benjamin go down to Egypt with the rest of you. His brother is already dead, and he is the only son I have left. I am a man, and if anything happens to him on the way, I'll die from sorrow, and all of you will be to blame.' Joseph's brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin. 43. The famine in Canaan got worse until finally Jacob's family had eaten all the grain they had bought in Egypt. So Jacob said to his sons, 'Go back and buy some more grain.' Judah replied, 'The governor strictly warned us that we would not be allowed to see him unless we brought our youngest brother with us. If you let us take Benjamin along, we will go and buy grain, but we won't go without him.' Jacob asked, 'Why did you cause me so much trouble by telling the governor you had another brother?' They answered, 'He asked a lot of questions about us and our family. He wanted to know if you were still alive and if we had any more brothers. All we could do was answer his questions. How could we know he would tell us to bring along our brother?' Then Judah said to his father, 'Let Benjamin go with me, and we will leave right away, so that none of us will starve to death. I promise to bring him back safely. And if I don't, you can blame me as long as I live. If we had not wasted all this time, we could already have been there and back twice.' Their father said, 'Benjamin must go with you. Take the governor a gift of some of the best things from our own country, such as perfume, honey, spices, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Also, take along twice the amount of money for the grain, because there must have been some mistake when the money was put back in your sacks. Take Benjamin with you and leave right away. When you go in to see the governor, I pray that God All-Powerful will be good to you, and the governor will let your other brother and Benjamin come back home with you. If I must lose my children, I suppose I must.' The brothers took the gifts, twice the amount of money, and Benjamin. Then they hurried to Egypt when they stood in front of Joseph. He saw Benjamin and told the servant in charge of his house, 'Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal and cook it. so they can eat with me at noon." The servant did as he was told and took the brothers to Joseph's house. But on the way, they got worried and started thinking, "We are being taken there because of the money that was put back in our sacks last time. He will arrest us. He will arrest us, make us his slaves, and take our donkeys." So when they arrived at Joseph's house, they said to the servant in charge, "Sir, we came to Egypt once before to buy grain. But when we stopped for the night, we each found in our grain sacks the exact amount we had paid. We have brought that money back, together with enough money to buy more grain. We don't know who put the money back in our sacks." "It's all right," the servant said. "Don't worry. The God," the servant replied, "Don't worry. The God and your father worship, the God you and your father worship must have put the money there, because I received your payment in full." Then he brought Simeon out to them. The servant took them into Joseph's house and gave them water to wash their feet. He also tended their donkeys. The brothers got their gifts ready to give Joseph at noon, since they had heard they were going to eat there. When Joseph came home, they gave him the gifts they had brought, and they bowed down to him. After Joseph had asked how they were, he said, "What about your elderly father? Is he still alive?" They answered, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well." And again they bowed down to Joseph. When Joseph looked around and saw his brother Benjamin, he said, "This must be your youngest brother, the one you told me about. God bless you, my son." Right away he rushed off to his room and cried because of his love for Benjamin. After washing his face and returning, he was able to control himself and said, "Serve the meal." Joseph was served at a table by himself and his brothers, and his brothers were served at another. The Egyptians sat at yet another table, because Egyptians felt it was disgusting to eat with Hebrews. To the surprise of Joseph's brothers, they were seated in front of him according to their ages, from the oldest to the youngest. They were served food from Joseph's table, and Benjamin was given 5 times as much as each of the others. So Joseph's brothers drank with him and had a good time. The missing cup, 44. Later, Joseph told the servant in charge of his house, "Fill the men's grain sacks with as much as they can hold, and put their money in the sacks. Also, put my silver cup in the sack of the youngest brother." The servant did as he was told. Early the next morning, the men were sent on their way, and their donkeys. The men were sent on their way with the donkeys, but they had not gone far from the city when Joseph told the servant, "Go after those men. When you catch them, say, 'My master has been good to you. So why have you stolen his silver cup? Not only does he drink from his cup, but he also uses it to learn about the future. You have done a terrible thing.'" When the servant caught up with him, he said exactly what Joseph had told him to say. But they replied, "Sir, why do you say such things? We would never do anything like that. We even returned the money we found in our grain sacks when we got back to Canaan. So why would we want to steal any silver or gold from your master's house? If you find that one of us has the cup, then kill him, and the rest of us will become your slaves." "Good," the man replied. "I'll do what you have said, but only the one who has the cup will become my slave. The rest of you can go free." Each of the brothers quickly put his sack on the ground and opened it. Joseph's servant started searching the sacks, beginning with the one that belonged to the oldest brother. When he came to Benjamin's sack, he found the cup. This upset the brothers so much that they began tearing their clothes in sorrow. Then they loaded their donkeys and returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers got there, Joseph was still at home. So they bowed down to Joseph, who asked them, "What have you done? Didn't you know I could find out?" "Sir, what can we say?" Judah replied. "How can we prove we are innocent? God has shown that we are guilty." "How can we prove that we are innocent? God has shown that we are guilty, and now all of us are your slaves, especially the one who had the cup." Joseph told them, "I would never punish all of you. Only the one who was caught with the cup will become my slave. The rest of you are free to go home to your father." Judah pleads for Benjamin. Judah went over to Joseph and said, "Sir, you have as much power as the king himself, and I am only your slave. Please don't get angry if I speak. You asked us if our father was still alive and if we had any more brothers. So we told you, our father is a very old man. In fact, he was already old when Benjamin was born. Benjamin's brother is dead. Now, Benjamin is the only one of the two brothers who is still alive, and our father loves him very much. You ordered us to bring him here so you could see him for yourself. We told you that our father would die if Benjamin left him, but you warned us that we could never see you again unless our youngest brother came with us. So we returned to our father and reported what you had said. Later, your father told us to come back here and buy more grain, but we answered, we can't go back to Egypt without our youngest brother. We will never be let in to see the governor unless he is with us. Sir, our father has reminded us that his favorite wife had given birth to two sons. One of them was already missing and had not been seen for a long time. My father thinks the boy was torn to pieces by some wild animal, and he said, I am an old man. If you take Benjamin from me and something happens to him, I will die of a broken heart. That's why Benjamin must be with us when I go back to my father. He loves him so much that he will die if Benjamin doesn't come back with me. I promised my father that I would bring him safely home. If I don't, I told my father he could blame me the rest of my life. Sir, I'm your slave. Please, let me stay here in place of Benjamin. Let him return home with my brothers. How can I face my father if Benjamin isn't with me? I couldn't bear to see my father in such sorrow. Joseph tells his brothers who he is. 45. Since Joseph could no longer control his feelings in front of his servants, he sent them out into the room. He sent them out of the room. When he was alone with his brothers, he told them, I am Joseph. Then he cried so loudly that the Egyptians heard him and told him about it in the king's palace. Joseph asked his brothers if his father was still alive, but they were too frightened to answer. Joseph told them to come closer to him, and when they did, he said, Yes, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Don't worry or blame yourselves for what you did. God is the one who sent me ahead of you to save lives. There has already been a famine for 2 years, and for 5 more years no one will plow fields or harvest grain. But God sent me on ahead of you to keep your families alive, to save you in this wonderful way. After all, you weren't really the ones who sent me here. It was God. He made me the highest official in the king's court and placed me over all Egypt. Now, hurry back and tell my father that his son Joseph says, God has made me ruler of Egypt. Come here as quickly as you can. You will live near me in the region of Goshen with your children and grandchildren, as well as with your sheep, goats, cattle, and everything else you own. I will take care of you there during the next 5 years of famine. But if you don't come, you and your family and your animals will starve to death. All of you, including my brother Benjamin, can tell by what I have said that I really am Joseph. Tell my father about my great power here in Egypt and about everything you have seen. Hurry and bring him here. Joseph and Benjamin hugged each other and started crying. Joseph was still crying as he kissed each of his other brothers. After this, they started talking with Joseph. When it was told in the palace that Joseph's brothers had come, the king and his officials were happy. So the king said to Joseph, Tell your brothers to load their donkeys and return to Canaan. Have them bring their father and their families here. I will give them the best land in Egypt, and they can eat and enjoy everything that grows on it. Also, tell your brothers to take some wagons from Egypt for their wives and children to ride in. But be sure to have them bring their father. They can leave their possessions behind because they will be given the best of everything in Egypt. Jacob's sons agreed to do what the king had said, and Joseph gave them wagons and food for their trip home, just as the king had ordered. Joseph gave some new clothes to each of his brothers, but to Benjamin he gave 5 new outfits and 300 pieces of silver. To his father he sent 10 donkeys loaded with the best things in Egypt, and 10 other donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other food for the return trip. Then he sent his brothers off and told them, Don't argue on the way home. Joseph's brothers left Egypt, and when they arrived in Canaan, they told their father that Joseph was still alive and he was the ruler of Egypt. But their father was so surprised that he could not believe them. Then they told him everything Joseph had said. When he saw the wagons Joseph had sent, he felt much better and said, Now I can believe you. My son Joseph must really be alive, and I will get to see him before I die. Jacob and his family go to Egypt. 46. Jacob packed up everything he owned and left for Egypt. On the way, he stopped near the town of Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God his father Isaac had worshipped. That night, God spoke to him and said, "Jacob, Jacob." "Here I am," Jacob answered. God said, "I am God, the same God your father worshipped. Don't be afraid to go to Egypt. I will give you so many descendants that one day they will become a nation. I will go with you to Egypt, and later I will bring your descendants back here. Your son Joseph will be at your side when you die." Jacob and his father set out from Beersheba and headed for Egypt. His sons put him in the wagon, and the king had sent for him. His sons put him in the wagon the king had sent for him. And they put their small children and their wives in the other wagons. Jacob's whole family went to Egypt, including his sons, his grandsons, his daughters, and his granddaughters. They took along their animals and everything else they owned. When Jacob went to Egypt, his children, who were born in northern Syria, also went along with their families. Jacob and his wife Leah had a total of 33 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, but 2 of their grandchildren had died in Canaan. Their oldest son Reuben took his sons Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Their son Simeon took his sons Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, whose mother was a Canaanite. Their son Levi took his sons Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Their son Judah took his sons Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. Judah's sons Er and Onan had died in Canaan. Judah's son Perez took his sons Hezron and Hamul. Their son Issachar took his sons Tola, Puvah, Jashub, and Shimron. Their son Zebulun took his sons Sered, Elon, and Japhliel. Their daughter Dinah also went. Jacob and Zilpah, the servant woman Laban had given his daughter Leah, had a total of 16 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Their son Gad took his sons Ziphion, Hagi, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. Their son Asher took his sons Imnah, Ishvi, and Beriah, who took his sons Heber and Malchiel. Sarah, the daughter of Asher, also went. Jacob and Rachel had 14 children and grandchildren. Their son Joseph was already in Egypt, where he had married Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, the priest of Heliopolis. Joseph and Asenath had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Jacob and Rachel's son Benjamin took his sons Bela, Asher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupim, Hupim, and Ard. Jacob and Bilhah, the servant woman Laban had given his daughter Rachel, had 7 children and grandchildren. Their son Dan took his son Hushim. Their son Naphtali took his sons Jasil, Guni, Jezer, Shalim, and Shalim. 66 members of Jacob's family went to Egypt with him, not counting his daughters-in-law. Jacob's 2 grandsons who were born there made it a total of 70 members of Jacob's family in Egypt. Jacob had sent his son Judah ahead of him to ask Joseph to meet them in Goshen. So Joseph got in his chariot and went to meet his father. When they met, Joseph hugged his father around the neck and cried for a long time. Jacob said to Joseph, "Now that I have seen you and know you are still alive, I'm ready to die." Then Joseph said to his brothers and to everyone who had come with them, "I must go and tell the king that you have arrived from Canaan. I will tell him that you are shepherds and that you have brought your sheep, goats, cattle, and everything else you own. The king will call you in and ask what you do for a living. When he does, be sure to say, 'We are shepherds. Our families have always raised sheep.' If you tell him this, he will let you settle in the region of Goshen." Joseph wanted them to say this to the king because the Egyptians did not like to be around anyone who raised sheep. 47. Joseph took 5 of his brothers to the king and told him, "My father and my brothers have come from Canaan. They have brought their sheep, goats, cattle, and everything else they own to the region of Goshen." Then he introduced his brothers to the king, who asked them, "What do you do for a living?" "Sir, we are shepherds," was the answer. "Our families have always raised sheep, but in our country all the pastures are dried up, and our sheep have no grass to eat. So we, your servants, have come here. Please let us live in the region of Goshen." The king said to Joseph, "It's good that your father and brothers have arrived. I will let them live anywhere they choose in the land of Egypt. But I suggest that they settle in Goshen, the best part of our land, because it's the best part of our land. I would also like your finest shepherds to watch after my own sheep and goats." Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and introduced him to the king. Jacob gave the king his blessing, and the king asked him, "How old are you?" Jacob answered, "I have lived only 130 years, and I have had to move from place to place. My parents and my grandparents also had to move from place to place, but they lived much longer, and their life was not as hard as mine." Then Jacob gave the king his blessing once again and left. Joseph obeyed the king's orders and gave his father and brothers some of the best land in Egypt, near the city of Ramesses. Joseph also provided food for their families. A famine in Egypt. The famine was bad everywhere in Egypt and Canaan, and the people were suffering terribly. So Joseph sold them the grain that he had stored up, and he put the money in the king's treasury. But when everyone had run out of money, the Egyptians came to Joseph and demanded, "Give us more grain. If you don't, we'll soon be dead, because our money's all gone." "If you don't have any money," Joseph answered, "give me your animals, and I'll let you have some grain." From then on, they brought him their horses, donkeys, and their sheep and goats in exchange for grain. Within a year, Joseph had collected every animal in Egypt. Then the people came to him and said, "Sir, there's no way we can hide the truth from you. We are broke, and we don't have any more animals. We have nothing left except ourselves and our land. Don't let us starve and our land be ruined. If you'll give us grain to eat and seed to plant, we'll sell ourselves and our land to the king. We'll become his slaves." The famine became so severe that Joseph finally bought every piece of land in Egypt for the king and made everyone the king's slaves, except the priests. The king gave the priests a regular food allowance, so they did not have to sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "You and your land now belong to the king. I'm giving you seed to plant, but 1/5 of your crops must go to the king. You can keep the rest as seed or as food for your families." "Sir, you have saved our lives," they answered. "We are glad to be slaves of the king." Then Joseph made a law that 1/5 of the harvest would always belong to the king. Only the priests did not lose their land. Jacob becomes an old man. The people of Israel made their home in the land of Goshen, where they became prosperous and had large families. Jacob himself lived there for 17 years, before dying at the age of 147. When Jacob knew he did not have long to live, he called in Joseph and said, "If you really love me, you must make a solemn promise not to bury me in Egypt. Instead, bury me in the place where my ancestors are buried." "I will do what you have asked," Joseph answered. "Will you give me your word?" Jacob asked. "Yes, I will," Joseph promised. After this, Jacob bowed down and prayed at the head of his bed. Jacob blesses Joseph's 2 sons. 48. Joseph was told that his father Jacob had become very sick, so Joseph went to see him and took along his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Joseph arrived, someone told Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to see you." Jacob sat up in bed, but took almost all his strength. Jacob told Joseph, "God All-Powerful appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, where he gave me his blessing, and promised, 'I will give you a large family with many descendants that will grow into a nation. And I am giving you this land that will belong to you and your family forever.'" Excuse me. Then Jacob went on to say, "Joseph, your 2 sons, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Manasseh were born in Egypt, but I accept them as my own, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children you have later will be considered yours, but their inheritance will come from Ephraim and Manasseh. Unfortunately, your mother Rachel died in Canaan after we had left northern Syria and before we reached Bethlehem, and I had to bury her along the way. Jacob was very old and almost blind. He did not recognize the two boys, and so he asked Joseph, Who are these boys? Joseph answered, They are my sons. God has given them to me here in Egypt. Bring them to me, Jacob said. I want to give my blessing. Joseph brought the boys to him, and he hugged and kissed them. Jacob turned to Joseph and told him, For many years I thought you were dead, and that I would never see you again. But now God has even let me live to see your children. Then Joseph made his sons move away from Jacob's knees, and Joseph bowed down in front of him with his face to the ground. After Joseph got up, he brought his two sons over to Jacob again. He led his younger son, Ephraim, to the left side of Jacob, and his older son, Manasseh, to the right. But before Jacob gave them his blessing, he crossed his arms, putting his right hand on the head of Ephraim and his left hand on the head of Manasseh. Then he gave Joseph his blessing and said, My grandfather Abraham and my father Isaac worshiped the Lord God. He has been with me all my life, and now his angel has kept me safe. Now I pray that he will bless these boys, and that my name and the names of Abraham and Isaac will live on because of them. I ask God to give them many children and many descendants as well. Joseph did not like it when he saw his father place his right hand on the head of the younger son. So he tried to move his father's right hand from Ephraim's head and place it on Manasseh. Joseph said, Father, you have made a mistake. This is the older boy. Put your right hand on him. But his father said, Son, I know what I'm doing. It's true that Manasseh's family will someday become a great nation, but Ephraim will be even greater than Manasseh, because his descendants will become many great nations. Jacob told him that in the future, the people of Israel would ask God's blessings on one another by saying, I pray for God to bless you as much as he blessed Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob put Ephraim's name first to show that he would be greater than Manasseh. After that, Jacob said, Joseph, you can see that I won't live much longer, but God will be with you and will lead you back to the land he promised our family long ago. Meanwhile, I'm giving you the hillside I captured from the Amorites. I'm going to stop there today.